This is AP Biology, Chapter 38. We're doing a discussion on conservation biology. Often when we think of conservation biology, we think of the big endangered animals like elephants and tigers. One of the things about the tiger is that the tiger has become a victim of contact with humans, specifically in Asia, where the tiger is actually significantly declined in population size. There used to be roughly 100,000 tigers. There's now down to about 5,000, and of those 5,000, they live in protected reserves. And often it was from hunting that drastically reduced their populations. There's already 3 extinct species of tigers. What the Myanmar government did says, we need to save the tigers, so they purchased land, they made it into a reserve, they hired local people to protect the tigers, and now their numbers are slowly climbing back up. Now, the reason why we care about this is because the tigers are an example of our biodiversity. Biodiversity is all the different animals that we have, but if we threaten the biodiversity, which is what humans are currently doing, we're going to lose animals. So scientists, as of right now, have documented about 1.8 million species. That number is climbing every day. And what they can tell us is that we're in the middle of a great extinction. Our extinction rates for animals today is roughly 1,000 times higher than any that they have documented in the past 100,000 years. Now, why do we need biodiversity? We need genetic diversity. We need species diversity. We need ecosystem diversity. And what's happening is that human activities are threatening the diversity at all of those levels. We're altering trophic structure, so we're altering food webs. We're altering where energy is coming from. We're altering our ability to chemically cycle things like carbon, nitrogen, hydrogen, oxygen. And so we're actually endangering many of our very critical food webs. One of the coolest things that we have is coral reefs. Coral reefs are being severely damaged by human activities, and yet they supply the food, or the ocean. And the ocean supplies most of human food. So by destroying our environment, we're destroying our food supply. And with that comes our need for more farms, which then leads to habitat destruction, which leads to animal endangerment, which kind of creates this vicious cycle. So why do we care about the biodiversity for humans? Well, it turns out that the food, or the biodiversity, the animals out there, provide us with our food, our clothing, our shelter, and even our medicine. One of the examples is the plant, which I cannot think of the name. There's a plant, and it actually provides the medicine that's one of our cancer treatment pills. Now, one of the things that happens is if we lose biodiversity, we're going to alter our biosphere. And at this point in time, this is a driving force of our industry. It's part of our economy. So not only do we need it for food and shelter and medicine, this biodiversity, but also it supplies us with our very income, the basis for kind of grinding the wheels. Now, the biggest thing that is destroying our biodiversity is habitat destruction, introducing species that shouldn't be there, and basically overexploitation, which means we're using too much of a product. And so, like I was showing you, we are currently altering habitats. We're taking away forests, we're building farms and roads and things like that. You take away the land that an animal needs to hunt and find its own shelter, you're going to take away that animal's population. We're also introducing species at an alarming rate. This right here is a really cool thing. It's called kudzu. Kudzu is a plant that has been introduced into the U.S. It turns out it loves living down south and growing and thriving. Unfortunately, it loves it so much that it's actually destroying local crops and plants and things like that. And it has cost an estimated $130 billion in damage. Now, when I talk about overexploitation, one of the best examples is the overfishing, the fishing industry. Where we used to go out and fish with fishing poles, we no longer do that. We go out and we use helicopters, we use nets, we use sonar, we use trolling, and all of that allows us to catch more fish than ever, which then drastically reduces population size out in the ocean. Another factor that's causing habitat destruction or impacting species is human pollution. And humans pollute by releasing chlorofluorocarbons, or CFCs, into the ozone by doing what's called eutrophication of lakes and streams. And then as a result of that, we can have biological magnification. Now, biological magnification, if we look here at this illustration, will show us how this happens. So there's a small amount of chemical that gets dumped into the water, and it gets taken up by phytoplankton. And phytoplankton, let's say it's there at a 0.02 parts per million level, which is very small. Well, the phytoplankton gets consumed by the zooplankton, and now the level has increased to 0.13 parts per million. But as you know, zooplankton gets consumed by our fish, which are called smelt, and so now it's at 1 part per million. Well, a fish eats a whole bunch of smelt, so now we have our trout that you can go fishing for, and now it's at 4 parts per million inside of our trout. The trout gets consumed by a herring, and now the herring lays an egg, and when you measure the amount of that pollution that all started out as 0.0 parts per million in the phytoplankton, we're now up to an astronomical 124 parts per million. That level is potentially dangerous. That's the magnification that happens along the food web, and that's a problem. One of the other things that happens is we are polluting as we go out and do things that provide us with products or resources that we want. This is a picture of Guyana, and if you look at Guyana, it's a beautiful, wonderful rainforest, and yet you can see all of this destruction. Now you may wonder, what is all that? Why is all that yellow there? That is bare, muddy land, and that is bare, muddy land that is the result of gold mining down in Guyana. And while you may say, okay, that doesn't look so bad, one of the problems that has happened as a result of the gold mining down in Guyana is that they're now having scientists go in, and what they're starting to find is that we are threatening the species that are found in that area. In one small study, scientists went out on a boat, and they looked to see what animals would I come into contact with if I was in this area gold mining. And what they found was things like tapirs. And for those of you who don't know what a tapir is, it kind of looks like a cross between a pig, a cow, and maybe a possum. There's tapirs, there's eagles, right? There's giant otters. And it turns out that these things are only found in that local region. So if we destroy them, if we destroy the land, we destroy those animals. The other thing that's happening as a result of our kind of need for gold or for kind of growing is we are creating global warming. And global warming is a result of releasing greenhouse gases into the environment, which then makes our temperature kind of on average a little bit warmer. It also creates greater fluctuations in temperature overall. So here's our human activities. Here they are. They're producing carbon dioxide. Human activities such as having tractors and cars and creating fossil fuels or burning fossil fuels, using hairspray, things like that. Then what happens is we release all that CO2, and it goes out into the environment. So here's all the CO2 coming out into the environment. And what happens as a result of the CO2 being out here in the environment is the sun comes down, it bounces off the earth, and then it gets trapped by the CO2, and it just bounces right back down to earth, causing us to be warmer and warmer and warmer. How do you get CO2 out of the environment? Well, the only option is through plants. Plants are the only thing doing photosynthesis and thereby taking the CO2 out of the environment. Now, when we talk about conservation biology, there's two ways to study it. The first one is called small population approach, and basically what the ecologists do is they go in, they look at a small population, they say, yep, that species in decline, here's how the species uses the environment, we're going to develop some hypothesis to kind of figure out what do we do, we're going to study the species, we're going to test an idea of how to save that animal, and then we're going to save the whales. One of the examples is from this owl. What they found was that the owl lived in the forest. The forest provided shelter for the owl. It provided the food for the owl. And then they told the logging industry, you may not cut down this forest because we have to save this animal. Now people say, but what about wood? We need wood for our houses. We need wood to build our buildings. The idea is that we need to start recognizing that there's huge impacts. And if we eliminate the owl so that we can have the forest, what might happen is we get too many rats. The rats then come into our houses, they eat our food, and now we have a problem all because we killed the owl. Now, there are some things that are being done as a way of saving the animals and kind of restoring habitats. One of the things that's happening is that we are preserving habitats. This is an example. This is an example right here of the red-cocked woodpecker. It's a woodpecker, so it's a bird. It flies around the trees. One of the ideas is that this is what the forest looks like that the woodpecker lives in. And notice we can't cut it down. However, if there's a problem with the forest, what they have found to do is that humans can actually help maintain that animal by having controlled burns within the forest to then allow plants to regrow and regenerate, to force seeds to become out of dormancy. And thereby we're keeping a habitat, we're keeping things controlled so that we can support animals. Now, with this idea of supporting and helping the animals, what we're doing is we're sustaining an ecosystem. We're sustaining the bigger picture. And so some of the ideas in landscape ecology is we're going to study ecosystems. We're going to find ways to cohabitate humans and animal priorities. And some of the problems with that is that if you have an animal that migrates long distances, we need to learn how to protect them over great distances. Not just, here's 50 acres in the middle of Wyoming, they have to stay in those. One of the big ideas is that national parks and reserves, so things like Yellowstone, Yosemite, they are there to help maintain small amounts of animals. But we need to get to a point where animals that are large or need large amounts of space, they too can thrive. Some of the ideas that have been put around is things like a land use bridge. This land use bridge right here is a really cool example of cohabitation. So what we have is a mix of nature and human activity. So here humans are, we can drive. Here humans are, we can drive on our road. No problem, right? While the animals are allowed to walk over the land bridge. Now the animals have a way of getting safely across human areas. With that being said, one of the other things we're doing is we're identifying what are called biological hotspots. And a biological hotspot is where there's lots of biodiversity, and it's an area that we need to pay critical attention to. Specifically, areas that have things like, let's say, the loggerhead turtle. We want to maintain this animal in the ocean area around it. So what we do is we go down to the government and we say to them, hey, government that is in South America, you now are the proud owner of the loggerhead turtle. Would you mind paying money, supporting, creating a reserve? Don't allow oil drilling. Don't allow development on the shores. Let's not dump chemicals into the ocean because that's where the famous loggerhead turtle lives. Another example is what's called conservation initiatives, and this is a really cool idea. So what Yellowstone wanted to do, they wanted to give the big animals that need to roam, they wanted to give them more space, not just the Yellowstone Park. So what they did was Yellowstone and the Yukon kind of eco area got together and said, look, we already have all of these protected areas. Why don't we combine all of these protected areas and have we're not going to establish anything within the regions so that animals can migrate all the way up from Canada and down all the way through Montana and Wyoming and Idaho. Now, this was vastly successful for wolf populations who are often found in Yellowstone. There is a current numbers for the wolves, which is pretty impressive. What they found is that the wolf numbers went from like 12 to 300, and that the wolves were found roaming all the way from the tip of Canada all the way down into Wyoming. So the animals were taking advantage of this protected free space in which they can go. A wolf does not want to end up in your backyard. It just does it because you're in the way. The same thing was done or achieved with the Yukon, Yellowstone kind of co-area with bears. Now, one of the things that's happening is we're looking at an entire area of science in which we're just studying how do we restore things that have become damaged. And what they have found is that there are lichens. So remember those little plant-like things that we've talked about? There are lichens that actually can be put out into the environment, and they will grow and gather up contaminants like mercury, copper, and they will concentrate it into their little things. If you look right here, this little black spot, that is concentrated mercury, which is a poisonous, toxic chemical. that they have gathered up from the environment and put inside of themselves, and they gather it. So we can just eliminate the lichen, eliminate the contamination from the environment. The same thing is currently being done using bioremediation, which is, well, what I guess that is the lichens, is bioremediation. But it's also being achieved with plants. So here's a picture of our Dr. Ariel Lugo, which we talked about in chapters 34 and 35, I believe. And this right here is a plant that you can put out into the environment, and what it does is it absorbs metal contamination. So if we have metal leaking, like iron, into the environment, it will go and it will absorb it and protect it. We can then take that plant out, and we've released the contamination from the soil environment, thus preventing it from ever entering a water source, and on and on. Another one of these is, how do we restore some of the damage that we've done? The Kissimmee River project was a really cool thing. They took a natural flowing river and we diverged it to make a canal. The canal then fed a city for water. What we've done is, scientists have done, is they said, we're going to take this back. And so what you can see here, this is the formal canal right here. They filled it in. And as a result of filling in that formal canal, the water was diverted, and now the water runs out here in its natural path, creating a wetland environment. That wetland environment has allowed animals and fishing and hunting and things like that to return back to the Kissimmee area. This is a really good example of rebuilding a habitat after it's been destroyed as a result of human activities. The other idea that we're doing is creating reserve zones. And basically it's the idea that, look, we're going to have an area that's undisturbed by humans, and it's ultimately will create kind of a buffer. And so here, if we look at this map to get an idea, you can see where we're not going to be developing. So Costa Rica is a biological hotspot. All of these green areas are national park lands, and the area around them are buffer zones. So the area in yellow is a buffer zone. I'm going to highlight it right here. That's simply saying we're not going to develop there because it's too close to contact with the national park land. It's taking a step in the right direction. The whole idea is ultimately, as we develop as humans and we take more of the ecosystem for ourselves, that we're going to be doing it in a sustainable way. We're going to not just have ecotourism, which is what this picture is all about. Ecotourism is a way to generate economy, jobs, money for an area and maintain the rainforest. But what we're going to do is we're going to find a way to build a way to sustain and interact, cohabitate with our animals. That's the end of our video.